morning. Good morning. Happy anniversary. So it's been 2 years, and I realize that 2 years isn't a long time, it isn't a big deal. But I thought, why not? Let's just celebrate this. And I want to do that. I am doing that. Because I don't think we celebrate enough in general in the church. And we have these sort of somber services, and we celebrate other places. And I think, joy is a good thing in a church. And so if there's an excuse for joy, why not take it? There's this argument among pastors as to when a pastor becomes effective. Some people say that really after the 7th year, that's when a pastor can really start to be effective. Other people say if you really haven't accomplished what you need to accomplish in 7 years, you might as well stop and go home. I'm more of the latter kind of person, mostly because, at my age, 7 years is a long time already. There isn't much left after that. So, anyway, here we are. My basic approach to pastoral work is very simple. My first job here is to love you, and your first job is to not make that any more difficult than it needs to be. That's pretty much my philosophy of pastoral work. But there's nothing very simple about love. It sort of starts out looking really nice and simple. We'll just love one another, and it'll all work out. But that gets complicated very quickly, as anyone who's loved anybody figured it out. Fortunately, as a Bible person, we have recourse, as a church, we have recourse to the Greek language, which is helpful because the Greek language has 4 different words that get translated into English as love. And so it helps us separate out things and sort of say, well, what are we really talking about here? So, and I don't know if you've heard this sermon before, the 4 Greek words for love, is sort of a classic pastor kind of sermon. So you've heard this before. Well, that's why you go to the back and get some colors and start coloring. It'll be okay, right? So the first word for love, one word for love in Greek is eros, from which we get erotic, right? And so when we translate that one, we need to think about attraction. So probably instead of translating that as love and getting all these different kinds of love mixed up, we should just think about that one as attraction. And that one is actually not found in the New Testament. Probably because, Paul especially is just really not much into this whole affection and attraction thing going on anyway. And interestingly enough, in Greek, right, that sort of erotic love is not linked to marriage. Right? Because, in that world, marriage was something that was arranged. And so, well, maybe you were attracted to your spouse, and maybe not. Right? But that was sort of immaterial. That was, because marriage was about other things. So anyway, eros. The second word that the Greeks used for something we called love was phileo, which is more like affection. Phileo was the affection between friends, between people who are equals. And this is interesting, I think, in a church context, or in the context of this church, because, I don't know, do we feel affection for each other? Do we feel friendship? One of the, it'd be sort of like, well, that would be a nice thing, but one of the things I found about this church is that this is a group of people who, outside of this church, might not naturally be friends. That if some of you met outside of church, you'd go, this person, I don't know about them. I'm going to go talk to somebody else. Right? But inside of here, right, we've decided to be at church together. Whether or not affection happens, right, love can still happen. So we need to sort of separate those things out and recognize they're different things. That's okay. Because these are not the same thing, right? So we can think about affection in the church as good, but not necessary. The third one is where it gets complicated, because the third one, right, is storge, which is familial love. It's the love between brothers and sisters, the love between parents and children, and hopefully reciprocated. So that's storge. And that one is complicated because it gets mixed up in the church all the time. That in some ways we think about the church as a family, and in some ways we don't. Especially in something called the Church of the Brethren, right? There's definitely a familial aspect to this, right? And so we, of course, add ancestrin to that, which still leaves us in a binary, but at least we're moving in the right direction. Okay? But there's also a point in which this clearly isn't a family. We are not, right? How many of you have changed families regularly in your life? And how many of you have changed churches fairly regularly, or at least fairly often? Right? So that happens. So this is one way in which this is chosen. You chose to be here, and if you choose to leave, you choose to leave. But families are tougher to leave. Families tend to hang around. Some people do manage to leave their families, but that's tricky. And so there's a sense in which this is a family, and a sense in which it just isn't. The other reality is that the word family is changing a lot. The idea of family is changing a lot. And that it used to mean things it doesn't anymore. Right? And so in the 50s and in the 60s and in the 70s, there was a lot of this, well, family was just assumed, and you had to sort of pretend that everything was going well in your family. And I think today there's a lot less pretending. And families just are dysfunctional. So many families, right? I mean, the divorce rate is 50%, so what does family mean in that situation? And the number of children in school who are living with both parents, right, is very small today. So family means something very different to them. So often when you talk to young people about the church as family, they look at you funny and go, I hope not. The last thing I need is a bunch of people like my family. But there's also this second sense of family, right, that we see strongly in West Virginia. And that is that families, right, family is family. You take care of each other. Right? For better or for worse, and often really, really for worse. You take care of each other. And so there's this sense of family that is, we want to hang on to. That this is the kind of church we want to be, that for better or for worse, we are going to be there for each other. And so the word that I'm going to suggest for storge as a translation would be obligation. That's what family is. Next Sunday, we're going to do Mother's Day. And we're going to celebrate Mother's Day, and some of you are going to go, I'm not sure I want to celebrate Mother's Day. Some of you as mothers may not want to celebrate your children. Some of you as children may not want to celebrate your mothers. Who knows? Right? But there's a certain amount of obligation that goes along with all of this. And that's okay. Right? But it's a different sort of thing than the church is. So then finally, we get to the word that is usually translated as love in the New Testament. The one that's usually used is agape. And when you read the New Testament, it's like love, 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 all over. Like you get to the letter of John, or the Gospel of John, or Paul's letters. It's just like love all over. And one of the interesting things is that this word actually doesn't appear very often in other Greek writings. They talk about the other forms of love much more than agape. And I'm going to suggest this morning that we translate agape as care, rather than as love. Because, like we read in 1 John, right, we're supposed to agape one another not as a feeling, but as an action. And now I realize that care is also a tricky word. There's nothing sort of straightforward about care. You can care for, you can care about, you can be cared for, you can be careful, you can take care, you can give care, you can be a professional caregiver. Right? So care can mean a lot of different things too. But again, right, language is tricky, and that's just the way it is. one of the interesting things about care is that you can fake it. Right? You can be having a really, really, really bad day and still go about your work being a caregiver. Now, you would do it better if you weren't having a really, really bad day, but you can still sort of fake it. I learned this lesson when my kids were small. Yeah, see? Yeah, you know this, right? And I think about this also when I think about patience. Because one of the things that Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13 is that love, agape, is patient. Now, I'm a big believer in patience. I think patience is a really, really good thing for other people to have. I just don't happen to have it. But what I learned as a parent is that you can fake patience. You can act patiently even if you're not patient. And that's pretty much the same thing. It's not quite the same thing, but it's pretty close. And I've had people comment on how patient I was with my children, which I thought was hilarious. But I had learned to, and again, the word act comes in there. Right? You can act patiently. Right? You can be an actor. An actor isn't somebody who is something, they're somebody who can fake something well. Right? And you can be a bad actor, that doesn't get you very far. But if you're a good actor, right, that's almost the same thing as being that. Except unless you have someone who's acting, right? Their job as acting is to be a doctor, and then right, that's probably not the person you want to ask medical advice to. But people who portray doctors on television often find that people ask them medical things in their real life because, they're really good at faking this. So it's tricky. But anyway, care. We are a group that cares about each other. And even on bad days, we're going to act like we care for each other. That's pretty good. That's a great thing to have people, right, who are having bad days and are still willing to act like they care for you. That's a good thing. That is not something to be ashamed of. I'm just faking this like I'm caring for you. I'm glad you're faking it. I'd much rather you fake it than not. Right? So we do this for each other. And that's part of my job here, is to care for you. However, right, however small a part that is. So let's read again 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the first few verses. And let's read it with the word care in there and see how that turns out. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not care, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith so as to move mountains but do not care, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not care, I have nothing. Care is patient. Care is kind. Care is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Care never ends. So we're going to go to communion now. Because in a lot of ways, bread and juice are sort of the basic ways that we care for each other. Just caring for the basic realities of our life. If you did some coloring, I invite you to bring that forward and put it on the communion table as a symbol, and I will take care of those. Right? Just like things I've taken care of all the time around here. And and we discovered this when we did cleanup yesterday. Some things get cared for and some things don't. And I come here an hour and a half before the rest of you show up on Sunday morning because there's things that need to be cared for. All all of this is just part of who we are together. But first we want to sing a song. And this song is a chant. So here we are in Morgantown Church of the Brethren, but I want you just to sort of, first of all, close your eyes and transport yourself into the sort of the biggest cathedral you've ever been in. Something big and stone, preferably, that has this like 6-second echo to it. Okay, and this is a chant, the kind of thing where you sing the first line and then you stop, and then you have to wait for the echo to die away, and then you start the second line. That's the way we want to sing this.
And what I'm going to sing the first verse, so you can learn the tune, and then I invite you all to sing with me. And because this is chant, we are doing it without piano. And you might want to stand up.
Yeah, you should stand up.